Just like Ethel Cain famously said on Tumblr, Gen Z has a major issue with taking things seriously. I don't think this is actually as big of a character flaw as everybody thinks it is personally, because when you think about the levels of existential dread that we are dealing with, there could be worse ways of coping with the insurmountable weight of that. So today I want to talk about what scares people who refuse to be serious, and I want to connect that with the film It Ends, which is a liminal space horror movie. So I'm going to include mild spoilers for it. I'm not going to include too much detail to the point that you can't enjoy the film and this analysis, but if you want to go in absolutely blind, I'll see you in the next one. Peace. So in the West, which is the only place I can really comment on because I live here, the most massive cultural impacts, in my opinion, are three big things. Firstly, the surveillance and recording of absolutely everything in day-to-day life. Number two, the climate crisis. And number three, the lack of resources due to mismanagement by previous generations.
I have the best advice for women in business. Get your fucking ass up and work. It seems like nobody wants to work these days.
When it comes to like surveillance, or like what people like to call the panopticon, which is basically everybody watching everybody else, in the US, courts a lot of the time dismiss challenges to general surveillance under the theory that mere surveillance itself causes no harms. But that is obviously not true. It directly chills your free speech because you know that you're being watched, and knowing you're being watched, whether that's like an insurance company or a data broker or your friends, is especially dangerous to overall creativity because it will stop people from experimenting with new or controversial or deviant ideas, basically stunting your creative growth in a really big way. Also, surveillance technology is ripe for massive abuses. It already has been massively abused, and it just increases exponentially the threats of blackmail and coercion. And
your smart TV's listening to me, your fridge has Wi-Fi in it, everything is smart, we getting dumber.
Adding on to this like pretty unstable foundation of this brand new type of panopticon, Gen Z has not met a lot of typical adult milestones, mostly because it is nearly impossible. Things like getting married and having children and buying a house are so much further into the future, if possible at all, than compared with previous generations. Nearly a fifth of 25 to 35-year-olds live with their parents, which is like a record high. So there is this additional consequence of living under brand new terrain. And if those two things weren't massive enough, there is this all-encompassing threat of the changing of the climate. We are probably going to face the worst consequences of that. Like, yes, environmentally, like with natural disasters, but also economically, and the additional existential dread of knowing that nobody's really taking it seriously and nobody in power is doing anything to help the situation. It's actually worse because not only is nobody helping, but we are building massive amounts of data centers that suck resources and energy. So that's pretty much of a downer, but I need to set a foundation for what Gen Z is dealing with as a generation, and then how that translates to what we are afraid of. So Gen Z and people around the age of Gen Z have agreed that these all really far away, unattainable, complicated weights are basically lessened and lifted when you're joking about it, or just generally taking it less seriously. If there is something serious, the immediate coping mechanism is to make it not serious. It is like things cannot exist in a serious vein with Gen Z because that would create a windfall of consequence and a windfall of things that are way too heavy to deal with. Nothing is really off limits. And this is not in like an edgelord way. It's just like for some reason, the response that we've taken. And the jokes are more of a way to connect with other people. They serve the function of immediately setting the groundwork for like who is in the know, and then also establishing a common enemy very, very fast. And from the outside, it seems like really gross and really insensitive, but how else would young people talk about these kind of things in a way that didn't completely ruin their day? Because it isn't just one bad thing, it's a lot. To me, I think it is a mix of like coping, but also a cultural processing. And you see this really clearly with a certain joke that was seen as so off limits, like you would lose your job. Saying you can't joke about this makes it so much exponentially worse. And like now there is permanent markers on the internet that will never go away because of the impact that the retroactive joking made. Now, how does this relate to horror or like what I'm talking about? I think this phenomenon has such a massive impact that it is too big to stop how much this will cause changes in the way that horror is done for the new generation of people. And what I mean by that is the trending stronghold of general unseriousness has made traditional horror pretty much useless when it comes to scaring young people. A villain cannot be campy, it cannot be tropey, or even too iconic without falling into like a that's me phenomenon. And I would say that is why a lot of the new generation of horror is less to do with one single villain and more of like an existential fear and dread. Because Gen Z's fears are not characterized by lots of blood or traditional monsters, but rather they're defined by a mixture of nostalgia, loss, and longing. And what has taken over the internet horror landscape is something that really easily meshes with this culture of not taking things seriously, because the fears and the villains and settings are so large and existential that they are like inherently nonsensical and fluid. You can make fun of them and also be really scared of them. And because of that, I truly believe horror now is so much more like bone-chilling frightening than it ever has been. Because even like memes of the villains and threats in the culture are still scary. Like, you can use them as reaction images, but also be terrified of them and respect them as a horror piece. So what is beginning to happen is like young directors, specifically with Obsession, Backrooms, Skinamarink, plus all of the independent analog and like small creator horror sprawling across the internet. The threat is not being killed, but it is a form of psychosis. Slashers and villains like from the previous 50 years that simply gut you are not scary anymore to Gen Z. And that is because the idea of death is not culturally relevant anymore. And this is partly due to massive desensitization, but also considering the fears of the young generation is not centered on losing everything because there is nothing to lose, but it is instead centered on like the stasis of staying where you are permanently. A lot of Gen Z's fears stem from psychosis and delusion and losing yourself rather than a physical threat. Like when you think of the cultural crazy phenomenon that was Yellow Jackets, the horror didn't come from dying in the woods. The most memorable and important part that people really picked up on was the delusion and psychosis and trauma that comes from eating your dead friend and like what that does to a person and how they lost their minds. Obsession similarly deals with this idea of loss of autonomy and losing your mind, being stuck in this liminal space. The Backrooms is essentially a portal to psychosis. It is like the easiest way to get into psychosis is to go to the Backrooms. And it has this like addictive, quasi-nostalgic, eerie setting that is like total catnip to the internet right now. And I would say that most internet horror is dealing with this theme of delusion in at least a major way. And this isn't really a new idea, like it's just coming up again, which makes it even more legitimate as a fear response. Because when you think of the idea of losing your mind, such as psychosis or madness or something like that, mixed with comedy and a general unseriousness, you can easily connect those two things to like the classic trope of the Joker clown. They go together perfectly because this idea of like meshing horror and comedy is a great combination. And the clown itself is a really eerie, uncanny figure that is both scary and familiar. So along with outside environmental pressures, the day-to-day activities of young people are challenged with things that truly affect and challenge your sanity. Of course, you have like phone addiction, which everyone basically has, which like if you go down the wrong rabbit hole, you can actually mess with your sense of reality and identity in a really major way that can make you do things you really wouldn't want to do, which is another scary thing. But the outside world, like outside of your phone, is just as strange and weird. Institutions in the West in the last few years have become like weird to the point of hilarity. And then adding on to that, there is so much less in the realm of third spaces as compared to previous generations, mostly because things are way more expensive. But most of the distinction between reality and what's fake is done by yourself. Adding on to this idea of like the Joker kind of trope, there is such an increase in like data extraction that you can't truly critique or say what you want to say without major risk. So joking about it and creating like cultural jokes about things is the only way to vent out that frustration. Now, I think all of this whirlwind has sort of created a Jungian style inner clown in everyone in this generation of people, because it is kind of the only way to deal with these massive existential hurdles and not lose your mind, is to be unserious about it. Because being insane and being driven to insanity seems like the ultimate fear for young people. And that is where the film I'm going to be discussing today comes in, which is the newest installment in like liminal horror in the vein of the Backrooms. If you are new to liminal horror, that's the biggest example, the most popular example. So the basic plot, with not too much spoiled, is that a group of college graduates are driving in a sort of old car in a road that never ends. The idea of that kind of sounds like, okay, whatever, like at least I don't have to go to work. But if you can kind of like wrap your brain around this, the first third of the movie, they've driven like 50,000 miles. And that's only the first third of the movie. That is about 833 hours or a month of driving. If you can really imagine the level of mental strength you would need to have to drive for a month straight with no breaks, basically, except switching off, that would definitely drive a lot of people crazy. So there's a really limited cast. They are so talented. Like they basically make the movie what it is, honestly. But there are 4 people. There is a really intelligent, like analytical, skeptical guy named James. There is a like lighthearted, light, but also really emotionally troubled character, Day. And then her sort of companion, like not romantically, but like they are functioning as a really similar character, is like the similarly really lighthearted Fisher. And what's interesting about Day and Fisher is them being so unserious and so willing to cope with comedy makes it so they last in their minds the longest out of anyone. But they both deal with really traumatic and intense reactions to being stuck on this road in a way that's like not less intense than anybody else. So they are harboring both sides of this coin. And the last character is a pretty like stoic, serious HVAC worker, Tyler, who they have not seen in a year because they are all graduating college and Tyler did not go to college. So them graduating college and then going on the road that is basically leading to a liminal space hellscape is a very obvious metaphor for like graduates in our time period being released into like a horrible situation. Personally, I think the most immediate way to recognize a young director is the soundtrack. So like in horror movies, your soundtrack can be liminal and dreamlike, or it can be campy and traditional. And there's a lot of variation in the middle, but a bad or like tropey horror soundtrack will literally ruin a horror movie. Like it will ruin tension. For some reason, I don't know why, filmmakers have not figured that out. I don't understand. It's like taken a new generation of filmmakers to stop this like awful tropey horror music. So in It Ends, they very much use a fantastic horror soundtrack technique where they're using like droning liminal sounds that are naturally occurring. So like the road, the car lights blinking, and then adding in like a random upbeat song that cuts the seriousness of the movie, but then is sort of eerie and uncanny for it even being there. Vivarium also does this. It makes the movie like not be bogged down in its own seriousness. I think soundtrack is like one of the strongest points that young filmmakers and young teams have against the way it is traditionally done. And not to say there aren't some like ahead of their time incredible horror soundtracks. Like what comes to mind is the totally liminal, horrifying Cannibal Holocaust soundtrack from the early 80s. But like it really does seem like liminal soundtracks and less is more approach has been reimagined by this new generation of filmmakers, and I really appreciate that. So obviously the group is driving for now months and months, realizing this road is not going to end. I think it takes like 6 or so hours before the group realizes that they are in a really bad situation. I think the like slow understanding realization part here in the film is extremely well done, because all of the people in the car go through stages of grief in a very realistic way. Inherently, mental health is a very dark topic sometimes, and it is important to portray that in a realistic way, even though it gets dark and uncomfortable. I think that is also a little bit of the reason why Mysterious Skin has become so popular with Gen Z, is because of how realistically and seriously it takes the idea of mental illness and how it does not sugarcoat it whatsoever. I think that's like missing from a lot of horror, to be honest, and It Ends is a really good example of it being pretty realistic. So it takes them obviously like days of driving before they've finally accepted they are stuck in a liminal space. If you can imagine the idea of driving on the same road, basically unending for 5 years and never sleeping or never eating, that is a big threat. Because the main threat in this film is the idea of losing your mind, yes, but also your personhood and like what makes you different than like a tree. So there are these violent people that live in the woods, basically. They are presumably people that have also gotten stuck on the road, but have either given up, their cars gave out, or something. They're like sleeper agents who are zombies who lay in the grass until a moving vehicle comes close enough and they get activated and basically storm the vehicle trying to get in. So these people are like trying to siphon any bit of humanity they can from whoever is passing, and the group in the car gets attacked by them like multiple times. So using their phone timers, they figure out that they have about 90 seconds after stopping the car before it is attacked by these sort of zombie people. What I think is interesting is towards the end of the film, the zombies don't care about them anymore and they can stop the car for however long they want. And I think that is not because they're further on the road, but because they have lost more and more of their humanity and the zombies cannot sense them anymore. They're just another zombie, basically. So what is the most important part of the film, I think, is the way that the people in the car adapt to the endless hell road. Examples of this are like getting out of the car and doing screaming, letting out emotions, pointless, playful arguments, discussing what they like and dislike. The film is basically showcasing a major, if not biggest, coping mechanism for people around the age of Gen Z, in this metaphor of being trapped together in hell. And you can assume the people that are zombies in the woods have lost their mind due to this boredom and psychosis of being alone. And the only way to regain it is to be talking with somebody else, joking with somebody else, and moving in the car, moving forward. So without any major spoilers, the last person standing has driven in the car for about 2 years. And the last year is basically spent alone. That is 2 years of the same road. And this metaphor of stagnation is really beautifully done because it really does encompass what it feels like to look at the future right now. Not only is it invisible and seemingly never coming, but it does seem so hopeless in a way because it's like, what is going right? But there is this like heavy-handed idea that without the distraction and enrichment of each other, the material situation is so bad that those who basically give up and go silent and lose their sort of playfulness and joy basically die. They lose their mind and become a zombie. And the only true relief watching the film is what these characters are doing with each other, like whether that's joking or even fighting. That is the only relief for not only them, but the person watching the film. It has this ending that to me signals like the point of this road of life is to be discussing with whoever's next to you in the car, and it's not meant to be done alone. So I think this is one of the more like weirdly heartfelt installations in like the liminal space horror universe, the LMSNUNF. So that is my mini analysis. I've been just thinking about this for a while because I think this is biased as hell, but I do think that horror right now is one of the only ways that like young filmmakers are getting a real foot in the door. I think basically all the other genres have been taken over by like predecessors and are not going to be handed away anytime soon, especially like giant movies. I don't know. It is crazy to me that like, okay, this is like, it's totally mind blowing that people in the 80s, like teenagers in the 80s, they saw themselves in a movie and like, it was pretty accurate to like what they were like. Like you're a teenager in the 80s, you see a teenager in the movie in the 80s, and it's like, okay, that's accurate, I guess. Like it's pretty spot on. And then Gen Z, you see a character in a movie that's Gen Z, most likely is nothing, not even accurate, totally like cringy, not accurate at all. That's actually a little bit insane. I think it's actually a rarity that a film can accurately portray the like cultural shit that Gen Z has going on. I think I can name it on one hand how many times that's been done successfully. And obviously it's done successfully in this movie, but I do like, first thing comes to mind is like I think it's uncomplicated. It's something like, I don't know why I can't remember the fucking name. I loved the show, but it is ran by young people. Like they wrote a lot of it. It stars random celebrities only Gen Z would know, like internet celebrities. So like that's an example. And it's hard to think of other examples. Like Overcompensating is the name. Why did I forget that? It was so funny. But anyway, if you watched till the end, thank you so much. Love you so much. Hope you have a great night or a great day, and go see the movie. It's really, really fantastic. I'm seeing Can't Miasma tomorrow, or maybe I've already seen it based on when I posted this, but hopefully it was good. Let's see. Really fucking sad that they sent me a merch box. Like, okay, this is going to make me sad again. They sent me a merch box because that happens sometimes. Like It got stolen because I live in Hollywood and like constantly someone's stealing packages. Genuinely hate it so much. Like the rush of adrenaline I get when I open my phone and see a package delivered, I like bolt down the door. I'm like, I need to get it before someone steals it. That's how bad it is. And it's not even like I live in a sketchy area, like at all. It's just, they're so sophisticated with the package stealing. It's like they steal everything. It's crazy. I don't know how they get in, but whatever. The first time it happened, my mom sent me like a KitchenAid, a red KitchenAid mixer. Yeah, stolen. Don't even get me started. Like, I'm gonna cry. I'm actually gonna cry. Okay, thanks for watching. Peace.